Episode 3, The Questions That Change Everything. So here we are. Alice and Bob staring at the same quarterly dashboard. We now know they're not just interpreting data differently, they're running fundamentally different neural processes to analyze the same information. Which raises a profound question. How do you have a productive conversation when you realize this is what's actually happening? The conventional approach treats disagreement as an accuracy problem. Alice or Bob must be misreading the situation. The goal becomes establishing who's correct, marshaling evidence, pointing out blind spots, building a case for the right interpretation. But if cognitive frames are real, if people can reach different reasonable conclusions because they're literally running different neural machinery, then most workplace disagreements aren't about accuracy at all. They're about whose frame is in play. This changes everything about how to approach the conversation. Instead of trying to convince Bob that Alice's conclusion is correct, or vice versa, the conversation becomes an exploration of how each person's frame is generating their perspective. The question shifts from who's right to how are we each thinking about this. The goal isn't to win or establish truth, it's to make both cognitive processes visible so that each person understands not just what the other thinks, but how they're thinking. And there are specific questions that make this possible. The first transformative question: what data are you weighting most heavily, and why? Watch what happens when their team leader asks this instead of trying to referee their disagreement. Alice responds first. I'm focusing heavily on the competitive intelligence showing we have maybe a 6-month window before 3 major competitors enter our space. The customer acquisition spike isn't just growth, it's market positioning opportunity. Yes, support tickets are up, but that's manageable if we capture market share now. Bob's answer reveals a completely different analytical focus. I'm weighting the technical debt metrics most heavily. Our error rates have increased 40% alongside the customer growth. Resolution time isn't just lagging, it's following an exponential curve that historically precedes system failures. I've seen this pattern before. Notice what just happened. Alice isn't ignoring the support ticket increase, she's weighing it differently against competitive timing. Bob isn't missing the market opportunity, he's prioritizing operational stability based on pattern recognition from his experience. Neither is wrong. Alice's frame is optimized for market positioning and competitive dynamics. Bob's frame excels at identifying operational risks and system vulnerabilities. Both perspectives are crucial for good decisions. The question revealed something that the original debate obscured. They're not disagreeing about the same thing. They're applying different analytical strengths to different aspects of a complex situation. The second transformative question: what past experience is shaping how you're seeing this? This question goes deeper, exploring how each person's frame got configured through their particular history. Alice might explain, 2 years ago, I led a successful fast launch strategy that captured significant market share before competitors could respond. We had similar growth metrics, similar operational strain. The teams adapted, and we established market leadership that we still benefit from today. Bob's history tells a different story. 3 years ago, I lived through a quality crisis when we rushed a release to hit a competitive deadline. Customer trust took months to rebuild. Support was overwhelmed. We lost enterprise accounts that still haven't returned. I recognize these early warning signs. Now the disagreement makes complete sense. Alice's frame was shaped by experiences that taught her about the value of speed and market timing. Bob's frame was forged through learning about the cost of operational failure. They're not bringing different opinions to the current situation. They're bringing different prediction machines, each calibrated by different lessons about what leads to success and what leads to disaster. Understanding this history doesn't invalidate either perspective. It helps everyone understand why Alice sees opportunity where Bob sees risk, and why Bob sees stability concerns that Alice might underweight. But here's what's remarkable about asking these questions: the entire dynamic of the conversation shifts. Instead of Alice and Bob each defending their conclusions, they're exploring how their different frames process the same information. Instead of feeling frustrated that the other person doesn't get it, they start to understand that getting it happens through different cognitive pathways. Alice doesn't have to become risk-averse. Bob doesn't have to become opportunity-focused. But both begin to see how the other person's frame generates insights they might miss. The conversation becomes collaborative rather than adversarial. People feel heard rather than attacked. And decisions improve because instead of defaulting to whoever argues most persuasively, the team accesses multiple analytical approaches. Most importantly, cognitive diversity stops being a problem to solve and becomes a resource to leverage. But there are two more questions that can deepen this transformation even further. The complete transformation, the first two questions, about data weighting and past experience, begin to reveal how different cognitive frames shape interpretation. But there are two more questions that can transform team dynamics even more profoundly. The third, transformative question: what assumptions are we each making that feel so obvious we haven't stated them? This question uncovers the hidden premises driving different recommendations. Watch what emerges when their team leader asks this directly. Alice pauses, then responds. I'm assuming our engineering team can handle a 30% increase in development velocity without significant quality degradation. Based on our hiring over the past 6 months and the modularity of our current architecture, I think we have the capacity to absorb higher demand while shipping faster. Bob's assumptions reveal a completely different set of underlying beliefs. I'm assuming this market opportunity will persist through a 6-month delay while we stabilize our systems. I'm also assuming that our reputation for reliability is more valuable long-term than first-mover advantage in this particular space. Suddenly, the disagreement becomes much clearer. Alice and Bob aren't just weighing data differently. They're operating from fundamentally different premises about engineering capacity, market timing, and competitive advantage. These assumptions felt so foundational to each person that they didn't think to mention them. But they're driving completely different strategic recommendations. Making them explicit often reveals that teams aren't actually disagreeing about strategy. They're working from different beliefs about capacity, market dynamics, or operational constraints. The fourth, transformative question: what would need to be true for your recommendation to be the right call? This question shifts the entire conversation from advocacy to design thinking. Alice responds, my approach works best if competitive pressure is high, our engineering capacity is adequate for increased velocity, and speed to market drives customer acquisition more than operational perfection. Bob's answer maps out different success conditions. My approach works best if market opportunity is durable, our reputation for reliability is crucial for enterprise retention, and technical debt poses genuine systemic risks that could damage customer relationships. Watch what happens here. They're no longer choosing between fast and slow. They're designing a strategy that addresses both sets of concerns. Maybe they accelerate customer-facing features while investing heavily in back-end infrastructure. Maybe they launch with a smaller, more reliable feature set that can be delivered on an aggressive timeline. Maybe they implement a phased rollout that captures market opportunity while maintaining system stability. A fourth question reveals that apparent either-or choices are often design challenges in disguise. The complete transformation, when teams start asking these questions systematically, something remarkable happens to the conversation dynamic. Instead of Alice and Bob each trying to prove their analysis is superior, they're mapping out how different cognitive frames process complex information. Alice doesn't have to become risk-averse. Bob doesn't have to become opportunity-obsessed, but both expand their analytical toolkit by understanding how the other person's frame generates insights they might miss. The conversation becomes collaborative rather than adversarial. People feel heard rather than attacked, and decisions get better because teams access multiple analytical approaches instead of defaulting to whoever argues most persuasively or ranks highest in the organizational chart. The business impact is measurable. Teams that understand each other's cognitive frames spend less time relitigating the same strategic debates every quarter. They develop shared language for different analytical approaches. Meetings become more efficient because people aren't constantly defending their thinking style. They're applying their cognitive strengths to different aspects of problems. Innovation improves because cognitive diversity stops being an obstacle and becomes a competitive asset. Alice's pattern recognition strengths might spot market opportunities that systematic analysis misses. Bob's analytical sequential approach might identify operational risks that intuitive assessment overlooks. People stay on teams where they feel understood rather than constantly having to prove their thinking is valid. When cognitive differences are treated as strategic resources rather than personal flaws, both team satisfaction and performance improve. But something else happens when you approach conversation this way, something you might not expect. You start to notice your own frame more clearly. When you have to articulate what you're noticing, what experience you're drawing on, what assumptions you're making, you become more conscious of your own cognitive construction process. You start to see how your attention gets directed, what narratives you default to, what premises you don't usually examine, and you start to realize that your frame, however useful it is, isn't the only way to construct understanding from the available information. Which raises a fascinating question. If cognitive frames can be recognized and understood, can they also be expanded? Can you actually change how your brain constructs reality? The answer might surprise you.